Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. It seems like winter is arriving very fast here. Okay, so now we are in the midst of chapter 8 in the Buddha's words. And this is the chapter on mastering the mind. And this chapter is particularly concerned, or the selections in this chapter are particularly concerned with the development of samatha, tranquility, serenity, and samadhi, concentration. In the last class I explained, based on some of these suttas that come in the Anguttara Nikaya, that there are different conceptions or different approaches to the development of the path of meditation. Particularly, there is a distinction made between the path in which, or presentation of the path in which serenity or concentration comes first, followed by insight or wisdom. Then there is some people take a path in which they develop insight or wisdom first, and then develop some samadhi, concentration afterwards. Some develop concentration and insight together as a pair. And still others realize the path in a rather unusual way, through the subsiding of, you could say, through first intense doubt about the Dharma, and then when this doubt and questioning subsides, then they achieve samadhi and achieve realization. Okay, but the presentation that we'll be following in this chapter is one which uses serenity or concentration as the basis, and then proceeds to the development of insight. And so we come now to selection number 3. This is on page 270. And in the course of the development of either serenity or insight, the major hurdle that one confronts at the very outset are the states of mind, the defiled states of mind, which pull the mind away from its meditation object. These are the distractions of the mind, those states which impede the effort to focus the mind and keep the mind consistently on its meditation object. The Buddha has classified these different mental obstacles into a fixed set which is mentioned countless times in the suttas. By the way, this light is glaring right into my eyes. This one right here is Venerable Sudama here. That's it. Well,
Can we move the table?
oh, it's the sun. Yeah. Sorry.
We'll move the table.
I think the sun will move. It's impermanent. In 2 or 3 minutes it will be. Let me move my chair a little bit. Okay, the sun will move. It's a very narrow slot there, so it will be out of that slot in 2 minutes. Okay, so this particular classification, the Buddha has classified these obstacles to meditation into the set which is called the 5 hindrances, and we meet these 5 hindrances countless times in the suttas, in the Buddha's discourses. We already met them in our presentation of the full path to liberation that came in the previous chapter. This is it's even difficult for me to read the page number now. Okay, I think it's 247. Page 247. The Buddha calls these 5 hindrances defilements of the mind that weaken wisdom. They're cetaso upakilesa, panya tubali karana. So there are defilements of the mind. As defilements of the mind, there are obstructions to the development of samadhi or concentration, but also they're panyaya dubali karana. That means that they are that they weaken wisdom. And so there are also obstructions to the development of insight. And therefore, whether one is practicing the path of serenity followed by insight, or the path of insight followed by serenity, one has to overcome the 5 hindrances. As a basis for the discussion of the 5 hindrances, I've taken one sutta which comes both in the Samyutta Nikaya and in the Anguttara Nikaya, in which a Brahmin comes to the Buddha and asks, why is it that sometimes texts, or these would be the Vedic texts that have been recited over a long time, do not recur to the mind, why it's difficult to remember them. And other times, those texts which have not been recited over a long time recur easily to the mind. Okay, the Buddha takes this question of the Buddha and then reframes it into the issue of how one neither knows nor sees what is conducive to one's own good, one's own benefit, the good of others, or the good of both. Okay, so you can say that these 5 hindrances are not only obstructions to the path of meditation, but they're obstructions to just about every aspect of one's life that's concerned with fulfilling one's own good, promoting one's own benefit, true benefit, and promoting the benefit of others. Okay, and now the Buddha is going to present these 5 hindrances, and then he's going to illustrate them with similes that bring out the particular effect that these 5 hindrances have on the mind. Okay, the first of these 5 hindrances is sensual lust. Kama chanda. Of course, in people's everyday life, then there's naturally some sensual desire. But in following the path of meditation, it becomes necessary to overcome this sensual desire. And in general society, we could see what happens when sensual desire becomes inflamed and gets out of hand. Then we have this proliferation of pornography, prostitution, sexually enticing clothing, just about attempts to appeal to just about all of the senses of a human being, to inflame them with sensual desire. And when the mind becomes inflamed by sensual desire, the sensual desire becomes a hindrance which prevents the mind from settling down, quieting down, and remaining focused on its object. We know that the path of meditation is a process of stilling the mind, quieting the mind, removing agitation from the mind, and keeping the mind consistently focused on its object without straying to other thoughts, to other objects. But when the mind is continually being incited and inflamed by sensual desire, then it can't remain focused, can't remain steadily absorbed on its object, and also the mind doesn't remain quiet and still, but it's always seeking gratification, but it's always seeking gratification through the senses. And so the Buddha says, when one dwells the mind obsessed by sensual lust, overwhelmed by sensual lust, at that time one does not understand as it really is, and one does not understand as it really is the escape or the release from the arisen sensual lust. On that occasion one does not know or see as it really is one's own good, the good of others, or the good of both. Then he comes back to this is the reason why the texts that have been recited over a long time don't recur to the mind, let alone those that have not been recited. Okay, now the Buddha illustrates this with a simile. He uses a simile of a bowl of water that's mixed with red, yellow, blue, or crimson dye. And so if one has a bowl of water like this, mixed with different colors, and then one looks into it in order to examine one's own reflection, then one would not be able to see one's own reflection as it really is. The reflection instead will show up colored by all of the different dyes. Okay, so this is the nature of sensual lust. Just as these dyes can be beautiful and attractive, so the objects of the senses can be beautiful and attractive. But even though the dyes are beautiful and attractive, but still they obscure the reflection of one's own image and prevent one from seeing one's own image accurately. In the same way, when the sensual desires come into the mind, then one doesn't think about what's in one's true benefit. You know, when people get overwhelmed, especially when men get overwhelmed by sensual desire, or women, then they're willing to do things that can lead even to their own, to getting killed, murdered, beaten, getting arrested, imprisoned, fined. They'll do anything because of this compelling, propelling sensual desire. Okay, the next hindrance is the hindrance of ill will. This is called in Pali Vyapada, which can mean malevolence. It also extends to anger, hatred, aversion towards a person, any kind of negative evaluation, particularly of other people. And sensual desire and ill will together are the two major hindrances. And the mind usually will vacillate or oscillate between one and the other, the untrained mind. Some people have a stronger inclination towards sensuality, so we call these people with a sensual temperament. Others have a stronger disposition towards anger and ill will. These are people with, you could call this a resentful temperament. But most people have some combination of sensual desire and ill will. And these two hindrances, they work very closely together. Since when we have a desire, then we seek to obtain the object of desire. But if we aren't able to achieve that object, if we can't achieve our purposes, then we experience resentment towards the person who prevents us from fulfilling our desire. We feel anger and hatred towards the obstacles that we're facing. Or else we become depressed and dejected because of our inability to fulfill our desire. So all of these are different forms of ill will. Okay, here now the Buddha speaks about the mind of ill will. He says, again he uses the same formula. When one dwells with the mind obsessed by ill will, overwhelmed by ill will, and one doesn't understand as it really is the escape from arisen ill will, on that occasion one neither knows nor sees as it really is one's own good, the good of others, or the good of both. Okay, then he uses a simile. This is the simile of a bowl of water which has been heated over a fire. And as that fire heats up the bowl of water, then the water starts to bubble and to boil. Okay, so if this water is bubbling and boiling, and then one looks in the water in order to see one's reflection, again, one can't see it. All one sees are the bubbles coming up and breaking. And this simile is a good illustration for ill will, because when we have anger, hatred, resentment in the mind, as you might experience yourself, it's like the mind is always giving rise to these bubbles which are rising and breaking, or rising and breaking. And just as the bowl of water on the fire becomes hot, so the mind that's overwhelmed by ill will also becomes hot. Hot with this hatred, resentment, and anger. Okay, these are, as I said, these are the two major hindrances. And in the early stages of meditation, these are usually the hindrances that we have to confront and overcome. But then, sort of hidden behind these two major hindrances, there are three other hindrances, which are the minor hindrances. But also these are obstacles to meditation. Okay, so hindrance number 3 is dullness and drowsiness. This is the way it's translated. The Pali word used here is tina mida. The word tina suggests some kind of, say, stickiness of the mind, hardness or solidity of the mind, rigidity of the mind. And then the word mida is used in normal discourse, it's used for sleepiness. So when one becomes sleepy in a normal way, also this is called mida. But what tina mida refers to is not the normal sleepiness, but drowsiness that sets in, particularly when one is practicing meditation over a long period of time. So it could be that one has had a good full night of sleep, but right in the middle of the morning or the middle of the afternoon, suddenly this sleepiness comes in and the mind starts dozing off and one becomes drowsy. Sometimes one wants to lie down. If one were not practicing meditation, if you were at work or doing your normal activities, you wouldn't feel any kind of drowsiness. But it's just because one is stopping the normal activities that engage the mind and seeking to focus the mind upon a meditation object that this drowsiness comes in. And these two terms that are used, tina and mida, technically, they refer to two different qualities of mind. We say two different mental factors. The first of these, which is translated dullness, tina, it's not exactly the same as mida or drowsiness. The way I understand tina, dullness, I have a simile of my own. Not coming from a Buddhist text. But it's like there are some days when you might have in the morning, say, a beautiful bright blue sky, the sun is shining, then suddenly clouds drift in, maybe the middle of about 12 noon, and then by 2, 3 o'clock, the sky is covered by not these drifting clouds, but it's a gray cloudiness which extends from the eastern horizon all the way to the western horizon, from the southern horizon to the northern horizon. It's just like one aluminum sheet spread out over the sky and covering the whole sky. And so you don't see it's not like a normal cloudy day where sometimes the clouds part and then you can see the sun, where there are different shades of cloudiness. But this is one gray, overarching mass covering the entire sky. So that is the simile that I use to illustrate this quality of dullness. And usually this dullness sets in first, and then when the mind is overpowered by this dullness, then it can't return, or it can't remain on its meditation object. One tries to bring the mind back again and again to the object, and the mind just doesn't stay on the object. The mind is just too heavy. And then when this dullness persists for some time, could be from 10 minutes to 30 minutes, then because one can't focus on the object, then the drowsiness sets in. The drowsiness is in a way the escape, or you could say for drowsiness, the sleep as the escape from this dullness. Okay, to illustrate this dullness even though dullness and drowsiness, technically they signify two different mental factors, but they both have a similar nature in that you could say that they are two different aspects of mental inertia. Their common factor is inertia of the mind. And that is why the Buddha has grouped them, has coupled them, joined them together as one hindrance. And then he illustrates this by the simile of a bowl of water that has been covered with water plants and algae. Fortunately, our Seven Jewels Lake here isn't covered, well, most of the time it's not covered by the algae. But if you can visualize a small pond in a wood someplace, and this would be particularly in a tropical climate, very often these plants grow up in the water, and these plants extend out over the water so that they're covering the water, and then along with these water plants, an algae will grow. And as the algae grows, it becomes a kind of thick crust which covers the surface of the water. And so if one has a bowl of water in which these water plants are growing and the water plants bring along the algae, then if you look into the bowl of water in order to see your reflection, you won't be able to see it. Probably you can't see it at all. So this is like the mind which is overwhelmed by dullness and drowsiness. So this is the third hindrance, dullness and drowsiness. The fourth hindrance is in a way the diametric, unhealthy opposite of this. This is called restlessness and remorse, or I translated restlessness and remorse. In Pali, it's called uddhacca kukucca. And this hindrance, too, is a combination of what are technically two different mental factors. The first of these mental factors is uddhacca, which is agitation of mind, restlessness, mental excitation. So this is the quality of mind that we can experience when the mind is just running from thought to thought without any kind of rational connection between the thoughts. Or sometimes one is worrying about something, even though it's a kind of irrational worry, but the mind is consistently going back to the same topic, the same object of worry, and just revolving around it over and over, until suddenly the mind will just, in a split second, rush off and then latch on to some other topic, and again it will start weaving schemes of thoughts around that other topic, then move on to something else. And so the mind continually just roams and wanders from one thought to another. So that is restlessness. Then its partner here, kukucca, is sometimes translated as worry. And so, in fact, I used to translate it as worry too. And so one gets a translation, restlessness and worry. But this translation is not perfectly accurate, because kukucca, normally the English word worry refers to the future. We're worried, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next week? Am I going to keep my job? Are my children going to do well in school? Am I going to get a promotion? Will I be safe traveling to such and such a country on a holiday? So worry is referring to the future. So in my opinion now, worry belongs with uddhacca, with restlessness. It's part of restlessness. But kukucca is something which it's a quality, a state of mind that refers to the past. It's regret or remorse over wrong deeds that one has done in the past. The word kukucca actually is a kind of colloquial form, which if we analyze the word, it means literally wrongly done. So if one has done something wrong in the past, and then one's mind keeps on going back to it and thinking, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. Oh, the consequences of that are going to be harmful to me. What's going to happen from what I did, result from what I did in the past. And again, continuing to hammer oneself with the sense of guilt over wrongs that one committed in the past. This is kukucca, remorse. Okay, so restlessness and remorse, these are technically, they're two different mental functions, two different mental factors, two different qualities. But they have a common thread, something which unites them. And what unites them is this quality of mental agitation, disturbance of the mind. Or we could call this a kind of lack of peace in the mind. Then we come to the simile in the sutta. Now we're on page 271. The Buddha compares the mind, which is overwhelmed by restlessness and remorse, to a bowl of water, which is put out in the open when a strong wind is blowing. And as the wind blows over the water, it stirs up the water, and it stirs up little waves and ripples on the water. And so when you have a bowl of water which is being stirred up into waves and ripples, then one looks into the bowl of water in order to see one's reflection. Can one see the reflection? You can, but what you see might be 100 or 200 reflections broken up into little mosaic pieces. Okay, so this is the hindrance of restlessness and remorse. The fifth hindrance, and let me just backtrack, just as sensual desire and ill will constitute a pair which tears the mind between them, so the mind is going either from sensual desire to ill will, or from ill will to sensual desire. In the same way, dullness and drowsiness on the one hand, and restlessness and remorse on the other, constitute a pair of opposite or antagonistic mental factors. So sometimes the mind becomes dull and drowsy, then it seems one is just about to fall asleep. But then as one is sitting there, something disturbing comes into the mind. But sometimes it could be some deep memory comes breaking up into the surface of the mind, and then the mind is off on a tangent, driven by this memory into a stream of agitated, restless, disturbing thoughts, and then all of the sleepiness and drowsiness are gone. What is alert and awake, but still not quiet and peaceful. So this is the way dullness and drowsiness and leads to restlessness and remorse. Then in the opposite way, sometimes the mind is being driven by restlessness, worry, remorse for things that have been done, bad things done in the past. And then in order to find some escape from this, the mind becomes dull, heavy, drowsy, and one tends to fall asleep. So in that way, these two work together as qualities or factors with opposed qualities, but both are preventing the mind from settling down and remaining focused on its object. The fifth hindrance is doubt. Okay, doubt in Buddhism has, you could say that it's a double-edged sword. In that on the one hand, the Buddha encourages doubt. He doesn't say you have to believe blindly, don't question, don't investigate. But when one comes to the Dhamma, starts to learn the Dhamma, naturally questions arise. And so, you say these questions take the form of doubts. One wants to understand particular points. One is unclear about particular points. And so to clarify one's points, one gives rise to doubts, and then one will approach, in the Buddha's time, one would approach the Buddha himself, or knowledgeable disciples of the Buddha. The present day, you can approach a Buddhist monk, a Buddhist nun who knows the Dhamma well, and ask questions. So this kind of doubt is encouraged in Buddhism. This is doubt intended to clarify one's understanding, to help one sharpen one's view, one's understanding of the Dhamma. But there's another kind of doubt, which is, sometimes it's translated skeptical doubt. And this is what is designated here by the word vichikiccha and translated as doubt. The word vichikiccha actually, if one analyzes it, it's based on the stem is the word chikicha, which means a cure. Like somebody gets ill and they take medicine. The medicine is, or they take a course of treatment. That course of treatment is the chikicha, the cure of their illness. And the prefix vi means without a cure. Incurable. So this doubt, this is a quality which makes all of one's other hindrances, all of one's defilements incurable, is that one can't overcome one's doubts. So this is the skeptical doubt which keeps on making one uncertain what one is doing, whether one is practicing correctly, whether the Dhamma is true or not, whether the Buddha is enlightened or not, whether others can achieve enlightenment by practicing the Dhamma or not. So all of these questions that come up, if the questions come up at a time when one is engaged in some other activities, then one can approach a teacher and ask the questions. Then we could say that these doubts are spurs to understanding, they're aids to understanding. But there's a certain type of doubt which remains hidden and quiet when one is engaged in the normal activities. But when one starts to sit in meditation, particularly as the mind settles down and the other hindrances begin to clear away, then this type of doubt starts bubbling to the surface. And then it creates an impassable obstacle. It becomes somewhat like if you're driving down a road and then you see these barriers put up on the road and the sign says, "Do not continue further along this road." And then there'll be another sign maybe saying, "Go back and take the detour." So then to reach your destination, you can't drive straight, but you have to go around along the detour. But when doubt arises, it's like those barriers on the road, but there's no sign saying detour. You just can't go further along the road. Then you have to consult your map and see, you backtrack and find another road, but no guide to the detour. So the Buddha illustrates this kind of doubt in the simile of the bowl of water. He says it's like a bowl of water that is turbid, unsettled, muddy. Okay, for these reasons, because it's muddy, the mud is all stirred up, then one can't see one's face accurately in the bowl of water. Even then one can see one's face in the bowl of water. But on top of that, the bowl of water is placed in the dark, so one doesn't even have light to be able to see one's reflection. So this illustrates this condition of the mind which is overwhelmed by doubt. So those are the 5 hindrances. And then to illustrate the mind which is free from the 5 hindrances, now we're on page 272, the Buddha says, "Suppose, Brahmin, there is a bowl of water that is not mixed with dyes. It's not being heated and bubbling and boiling. It's not covered over with water plants and algae, not stirred by the wind into wavelets, but it's clear, serene, and then it's clear, serene, limpid, and it's put out in the light. So if you take a bowl of water like this, and you look at the bowl of water, then you can see your face reflected in that bowl of water. So this illustrates the mind which is free from the hindrances of sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. At our last class, we gave out a handout on the 5 hindrances. Did everybody get a copy? Venerable Sudama had prepared some additional copies. Okay, they're right here in the front. So if anybody needs a copy, please just raise your hand. Okay, the sutta, the passage that we just read, spoke about knowing and not knowing the escape from the arisen hindrance. And so, using this table that I prepared, I want to examine these escape routes from the 5 hindrances, since this is important for the development of meditation, to the development for reaching the state of samadhi or concentration. Okay, so first we take the hindrance of sensual desire. And to know the escape route from the hindrance, one also has to know the condition from which it arises. And the Buddha explains elsewhere, he says, that sensual desire or sensual craving arises from careless attention to an attractive object. This is a yoniso manasikara. A yoniso manasikara is so when the mind focuses on an attractive object, an object of the senses, and then one attends to that sense object carelessly or in a faulty way, superficially, then one focuses upon the attractive appearance of the object. And because one focuses on the attractive appearance, then there's a natural tendency for that object to provoke sensual desire. Okay, the most obvious example of this is sexual desire. It's when the mind focuses for a man on the beautiful form of a woman focuses on the beautiful form of the man, then the sexual desire tends to arise. And so the way to overcome the sensual desire is to shift one's attention, first to change the mode of one's attention. One shifts from careless attention which just focuses upon the beautiful or attractive surfaces of things. Instead, one probes more deeply. One looks at the object more carefully, more thoroughly. And then, as one does so, this will bring out, sorry to say this, but it's the asubha aspect of the object. This is, literally, it's the unbeautiful aspect of the object. Or we could call it the unattractive aspect of the object. So the Buddha teaches, as a particular hindrance or a particular antidote or remedy for the hindrance of sensual desire, he teaches close attention to an unattractive object. And this unattractive object is the human body. And initially it is one's own body that is taken as the object. So the tendency of the mind is to focus, as I said, on the beautiful object of some other person, or the beautiful appearance of some other person's body. And so initially, one can't begin by trying to focus on the unattractive aspects of that other person's body, because as a general rule, it doesn't work very well. One might start thinking that one can focus upon the unattractive aspects of the other person's body, say a man focusing on a beautiful woman, but within a few minutes the mind will slip away from the unattractive aspects of the body and begin focusing on lovely hair, beautiful smile, nice eyes, nice figure. And then the sensual desire starts to arise. And so one has to, at the outset, one takes one's own body as the object of attention. And one focuses not on the superficial appearance of one's body, but one focuses on the constituent parts of the body. Therefore, the Buddha has placed a lot of emphasis on this analysis or dissection of the body into its parts, and the dwelling of the mind on the parts of the body. In the Buddhist text we have the formulation of some 31 parts of the body. Later texts add the brain to make a more rounded figure of 32 parts. We will come to this later in this chapter when we come to the Satipatthana Sutta. But basically, the development of the attention to the unattractive object means that one focuses in meditation upon these parts of the body, seeing how the body, one's own body, is a composite of parts which, when one takes them individually, are not beautiful and attractive, but even repulsive. And then when one masters this meditation on one's own body, then one can look upon the bodies of others, and then one sees that a human being, what is a human being? But a composite, an aggregate whole of these skin, flesh, bone, blood. Put all of them together and somebody offers them to you for $1 million, you say, no thank you. Okay, so this is the way of developing the attention to the unattractive object. And that is the specific antidote to sensual desire. The commentaries mention a number of other measures that one could take as remedies to sensual desire. You could read this on the table. I won't be discussing them. Okay, the next hindrance is ill will. Ill will, anger, hatred, aversion, arises through its own condition, and that condition is, again, it's ayoniso manasikara. It's careless attention, unwise attention to a repugnant object, a repulsive object, something which naturally tends to arouse aversion. Sometimes this could be just the face of another person. Sometimes it happens that there's another person who's never done any harm, done nothing to harm you. You've perhaps never met this person before, but this person comes into the room And there's just something about the person's face, their way of moving, their way of walking, their way of doing things, that irritates you, annoys you. The mind fixes upon that, and then there will arise some aversion or dislike for that person. But more generally, in everyday life, it happens that there are people who do harmful things to us, people who insult us, denigrate us, people who compete with us for position and honor, people who speak despicably about us to others, malign us. And when we learn about these things, or when we experience them firsthand through encounters with this person, these types of things will arouse in us antagonism, resentment, even a feeling of enmity towards that person. In other cases, there are resentments and aversion based upon, we call these biases and prejudices. So we have racial prejudices, religious prejudices, ethnic prejudices. All of these prejudices are grounds. We learn about them from others. People tell us you shouldn't trust a black man as president. You shouldn't allow a Jew to move in next door to you. Shouldn't live in a neighborhood with Buddhists practicing their strange rituals, worshipping these deities. Okay, so these are biases and prejudices which become ground for aversion. So, to overcome ill will, one has to develop, first I would say one has to dispel one's biases and prejudices by careful consideration. Here we don't even come to the development of loving kindness, but just consider that these biases and prejudices are groundless, that they're just in a sense superstitions, and then we can dispel them. But when it comes to other people who actually do things which could be mean and harmful to us, then we have to stop allowing the mind to focus upon these negative experiences, and we have to develop the mind of loving kindness. So this can be done in daily life and also as an exercise in meditation. And I want to jump now, just to deal with this loving kindness, to jump from the passage that we've been going through on the similes for the five hindrances to a passage that comes a little bit later in this chapter. This is on page 278. It's just entitled, The Mind of Loving Kindness. Here the Buddha is explaining how to develop loving kindness in response to hostile speech, denigrating speech, which others might address to us. So he says that there are these 5 ways of speech that others may use when they address you. The speech may be timely or untimely. The speech may be true or untrue, gentle or harsh. It might be connected with good or with harm. That is, it might be beneficial to you or it might be harmful to you. Again, it might be spoken gently with the mind of loving kindness, or it might be spoken angrily with a mind of hatred. But then the Buddha gives the advice on how to train under these circumstances. And this is particularly the case when others speak in ways that are harsh, that are harmful, and that are spoken with a mind of hatred. He says, you should train thus. Our minds will be unaffected, and we shall utter no bitter words. We shall dwell compassionate for their welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, never in a mood of hate. We shall abide pervading this person with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and then starting with that person, we shall dwell pervading the entire world with a mind of loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Then the Buddha gives the most extreme case. Even if bandits, criminals were to catch you and then start to sever you savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled sword, one who gives rise to a mind of hatred towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. But rather, the Buddha says, even under those conditions, you should train thus. Our mind will remain unaffected. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of loving kindness, never in a mood of hate. We should pervade them with this mind imbued with loving kindness, and then starting with them, we should abide the whole world with a mind of loving kindness. So that is how you should train yourselves. So the Buddha is explaining here in a rather concise way the practice of developing what's called the liberation of the mind through loving kindness. But normally one doesn't begin with an enemy, somebody who is hostile to you, but we begin by developing loving kindness. You begin by developing loving kindness first to yourself, then you choose a dear and respected person, develop loving kindness towards them, then choose a friendly person, a close or dear friend, then one chooses a neutral person, and then after one is able to develop loving kindness successfully, strongly, powerfully towards these people, then one brings in the hostile person, and one develops loving kindness towards that person. This is the way to practice in order to develop the very powerful samadhi of loving kindness. But my advice in day-to-day life, if you do a meditation on loving kindness, or even a recitation on loving kindness, bring in all of these people, including the hostile person. And then when you finish with the hostile person, then you consider the whole world, all beings in the whole world, and you extend loving kindness towards them. There are quite detailed explanations for the development of loving kindness, but in order to cover all of this material today, I can't go into it now. Perhaps later we will come to it. So now we move on to the third hindrance. This is dullness and drowsiness. And the condition which is given, which causes it to arise, the condition that's mentioned in the sutras is careless attention to discontent, or we could say this is boredom, to lethargy, torpor after meals, that is after eating, especially a heavy meal, one sometimes gets sleepy or drowsy, and then just the ordinary sluggishness of mind. I have to confess that I've never quite understood what's meant by careless attention to this discontent, lethargy, torpor after meals, and sluggishness of mind. In my experience, the primary condition is not so much careless attention to these things, but simply the fact that these things arise, these qualities arise, that sometimes when one is practicing, one becomes bored with the practice, and then discontent with it. Sometimes lethargy arises. And then the usual advice after a meal is not to begin practicing meditation at once, but to engage in some activity, could be like a walking meditation, and then to lie down and even allow oneself to take a little nap for about 10 or 15 minutes. I compare this to diving into water. When you dive into the water, you just go down into the water, and then you come up to the surface. Just like that. And then the mind becomes very refreshed, and all of the dullness and drowsiness just goes away. But the little nap has to be very short, just 10 or 15 minutes. If you go on sleeping for an hour or 2 hours, then it makes the mind feel very unpleasant. And then after that, it becomes very difficult to resume one's concentration. The antidote that the text explained to this dullness and drowsiness is called careful attention to the three elements of energy. We might consider these to be three stages in the arising or development of energy. The first is arousing energy, stirring up one's effort. The second, once the energy has been aroused, is persisting in one's effort. So now the energy is flowing on, it's picked up some momentum, it's able to flow on without being deterred by states of lethargy and drowsiness. And then the third stage, we translate this here as vigorous effort. Now the energy is actually able to overcome any kind of barriers, any kind of obstacles. If any kind of dullness or drowsiness starts to arise, immediately it's knocked away. In fact, the mind doesn't become dull or drowsy at all. The mind is very alert, very strong, very vigorous. Even we could say the mind has now become invincible. We call this invincible energy. And so, to overcome the dullness and drowsiness, first arousing energy, then persisting in one's effort, then as one persists, making the strong determination again and again, then the energy becomes vigorous, even it becomes a kind of natural energy, so that one doesn't have to exert oneself with great effort, with great determination, but just the energy, which is an arousing factor, and the samadhi, a quieting factor, are yoked together. So one just makes the determination to put the mind on the object. The mind immediately goes to the object and remains settled there. And the energy is firm and consistent. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and remorse. The primary condition that the texts give for restlessness and remorse is careless attention to an unsettled mind. It's natural for disturbing or distracting thoughts to arise in the mind. This is the way the mind functions. If we could all just sit down, direct the mind to the meditation object, and then the mind immediately goes on that object and stays upon it, then we would all be Buddhas, we would all be Arhats, without any need for effort. But it's part of the functioning of the mind because of our habits through beginningless time that distracting thoughts, disturbing thoughts arise in the mind wanders. But what keeps the mind in the grip of these disturbing thoughts is what the text calls careless attention to the unsettled mind. Or I would actually think, perhaps more appropriately, I would say, no attention to the unsettled mind. That is, one doesn't even recognize that the mind is disturbed or distracted, but one just allows the mind to flow, to drift in the stream of thoughts. So one doesn't recognize that the mind is being driven around by one thought after another. One is not attentive enough to the functioning of the mind to catch the mind as it is swayed and driven by these thoughts that arise. One can see this for oneself when one is sitting in meditation. One might be focusing on an object. It seems that the mind is settling on the object. And then the next thing you know it, the mind is lost in a maze of thoughts. What is it that you miss there? What is it that went by undetected? Anybody have any idea?
Well, just the thought. Just the fact that one hasn't paid attention to the fact that the mind is moving.
Exactly. What one missed, or to put it more precisely, was the first distracting thought that arose. Somehow that thought arose, but one wasn't attentive to it. And then because that thought went by undetected, it sort of opened the door for other thoughts to come in. And then suddenly, might be 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, you recognize, I've lost the object. How long ago did that happen? And then you don't even remember how long ago you lost the object. This is a little bit like if you have a shop, maybe a large shop selling different kinds of goods, and then there are different counters, but there's nobody inspecting the shop, none of these reflecting mirrors in the corner. Then a shoplifter comes in, and he's able to go behind the counter and start stealing things. And since he knows he's not being watched, he'll come again and again to the shop until before you know it, when you take inventory, you wonder, where have all my goods gone? They've all been taken out by the thief who's come in and stolen because he was undetected. Nobody was paying attention to the shop. Okay, so this is careless attention to the unsettled mind, or I would call it no attention to the unsettled mind. The antidote to this, the escape from it, is careful attention. It's called in the text, careful attention to peace of mind, or careful attention to the peaceful mind. Again, I have to say, my confession, I find this expression a little bit obscure. The way I would see the remedy for restlessness and remorse, the direct antidote would be paying attention or turning the attention to an object that naturally makes the mind quiet and peaceful. So usually the object that's recommended for the wandering, unsettled mind is mindfulness of breathing, attention to the breath. Because when one pays attention to the breath tends to become quiet, to settle down. And as one is following the quiet breath, the mind also settles down and becomes quiet. But what is sometimes particularly troubling is this issue of remorse or feelings of guilt over wrongs that one has committed in the past. These often come up in meditation. And so the problem arises how to deal specifically with this kukucha, this remorse. If one has just recently wronged some other person and one feels uncomfortable about this, it's maybe created some strain in one's relationship, then the natural way is to apologize. Or if that person is not even known that one has committed wrong to that person, one could tell the person what one has done and then apologize. But sometimes memories come up of things that were wrongly done long ago where one cannot settle the issue through an apology or through an immediate confession. Then the way to overcome this remorse is to simply recognize, in the past I did something that is wrong. In my present situation, there's no way to correct this, but let me determine in the future not to commit such kinds of wrong deeds hereafter. In the Chinese tradition, there's a practice which is a way of covering all of the wrong deeds one has ever committed in one's past existence in samsara. This is a confession that's part of the regular morning and evening rituals in many monasteries. One confesses all the evil karma I've ever committed in this beginningless samsara, caused by greed, hatred, and delusion, arisen through body, speech, and mind, is boundless and immeasurable. I hereby confess and repent it all, and pledge myself not to commit evil deeds hereafter. So if one feels a lot of problem with this remorse, one could use a formula like that. And then one has to recognize that one shouldn't allow the mind to be constantly pulled away by this remorse over wrong that has been done. It just becomes an obstacle to one's further development. One should rectify what can be rectified in the present, what can't be rectified. One should just recognize to oneself and then determine to follow the right path in the future. Okay, then we come to the fifth hindrance. This is the hindrance of doubt. The primary condition the text gives for doubt is careless attention to things that are a basis for doubt. The way this is expressed is a little obscure. The way I would understand it is when one is actually engaged in the practice of meditation and then things come up that cause doubt, one should put this in a kind of column, a mental column of issues to be resolved later, not to try to resolve them while one is sitting in one's meditation, trying to keep the mind on an object, on a fixed object. So if you have doubts, questions about this point, that point, don't try to settle all of these doubts in one session of sitting meditation or one session of walking meditation. But recognize that these are things that are the proper field for settling these issues is at a time when I'm engaged in intellectual activity. So then when I have the opportunity, I'll either study some texts which might answer these questions or approach a teacher, a Dharma teacher, to discuss these questions. The antidote that's given in the suttas is to overcome doubt, is careful attention to contrasting or opposed mental qualities. This is because the example that's given of doubt is doubt about what is good, what is bad, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is beneficial, what is harmful. So in order to clarify one's mind about these questions, one has to carefully attend to these contrasting mental qualities. So one, for example, if one attends carefully to greed, hatred, and delusion, reflects upon them, considers what is the effect of these qualities upon myself, how do they affect my behavior in relation to others, how do they affect life in my family, in my community, in my society. So in this way one could see the harmful consequences of greed, hatred, and delusion. Then one considers the opposite qualities like generosity, loving kindness, wisdom. Considers what is the effect of these mental qualities upon myself, upon others, upon my community, family, and so on. So in this way, one, by reflecting on these consequences of these contrasting qualities, one can overcome one's doubts. Okay, maybe at this point then I'll pause and then I'll invite any questions that you might have. Yes, please, John.
All these hindrances relate to the meditation practice. Addressing this.
I would say that the hindrances, the way they're usually discussed, relate to meditation practice, but they also extend beyond the range of simple meditation. But they could also, you can see that they also affect our day-to-day life.
That was really I mean, just they really interfere with mindfulness.
They interfere
With mindfulness.
yeah, they interfere with mindfulness.
Okay. And the use of sensual lust, the sexual connotation is readily apparent, but that should be interpreted, should it not, also more broadly, just as food or entertainment.
Definitely it has a broader implications.
Okay, thank you.
The way the antidote is explained as the attention to the unattractive object, in that case it's sort of specifically targeted at sexual lust. But we can see implications, broader implications for many different aspects of life. Like some people, they enjoy going to nightclubs, gambling, drinking, compulsion to go to fine restaurants, always have to enjoy foods of different tastes.
Thank you.
But for ordinary life, say, I don't want to discourage people from listening to good quality music. Since what I would say is that good quality music can actually be uplifting, spiritually uplifting. Suki?
It's a simple question, also it's related with...
I'm a simple lot, so you can ask a simple question.
It's about the sensual karma chanda.
Yeah.
A lot of times you translate it as a sensual desire, chanda as a desire, however you also use it as a sensual lust.
Right.
And in this book you use sensual lust, and on this chart you use sensual desire.
Okay. Yeah.
What is the reason why you use sensual lust?
Okay.
Me, chanda, kind of, when you think about nekama chanda, desire seems more appropriate, but I like to know any particular...
Okay, the question why I use sensual lust. This is because the text itself uses the two different terms. When it's actually discussing the 5 hindrances in a list, we get sensual desire, kama chanda. But when, in this particular passage on the using the 5 similes, the Pali text uses kama raga. So it's kama raga that's translated sensual lust, and kama chanda, which is translated sensual desire. So it's not me, it's the text itself. Behind... Yeah.
I was going to ask, you speak of the mind and the ability of the mind to bring up things of the past, whatever. And I was wondering, what is the mind that is doing the thinking, and what is the natural mind?
And what is the what?
The natural mind. In other words, who is the observer that is listening to the mind that doesn't have a mind of its own?
Who is the observer that is listening or watching the mind that doesn't have a mind of its own?
Exactly.
Okay. This in a way gets into a philosophical question, which is not directly related to the text itself. So looking at that question from a philosophical point of view, we would say in Buddhism that the who is a delusion. That there is not a persisting self there, which is the observer, and which has an identity of its own. And this is, in a sense, this is the root delusion that the whole Buddhist teaching is intended to eliminate. But, okay, having said that, here I'm speaking from my own personal understanding, not just reflecting the text. It seems to me that the mind has a dual capacity, that within the mind there's two different aspects. There is, in any particular moment of mind, there is the aspect of the mind which is engaged with the content, and then there is the aspect of the mind which is able to reflect on that content. Okay, now what normally happens is that the aspect of the mind that's able to reflect on the content is overwhelmed by the content itself, by the aspect of the mind that's engaged with the content. So that the reflective aspect of the mind is not very prominent, because the aspect of the mind engaged with the content, it's dominant. It's the dominant aspect of the mind. What one does when one is practicing meditation is attempting to remove the mind from its absorption in the content, sort of separate it out initially by giving it some other content to focus upon, some content which is simple and undifferentiated or with minimal differentiation, like the in and out breath, or sometimes a colored circle is used. The effort to keep the mind on this single object without letting the mind drift away and be overwhelmed by the content, that effort brings to the surface, or it makes more visible, the distinction between these two aspects of the mind, the observed and the observing aspect. And so once one is able to draw the mind away from its involvement with the observed aspect, then one can use that focused mind as the base of observation to then look back upon one's experience and then see and understand the nature of one's experience. But then one is also, this is the sort of tricky part, one uses this observing function of the mind to also reflect back upon the observing aspect itself, not just to be engaged with the content, but to reflect back upon the observing aspect itself. And then when one reflects back on the observing aspect, one sees that each occasion of observation is impermanent. And so there's no permanent observer which is there as the who of the act of observation. And when that's done consistently enough, then that appearance of the who, the one who's observing, breaks apart. But that goes beyond this particular stage of our discussion.
I believe I've heard lay teachers talk about a skillful or a wholesome remorse. I'm wondering if they're referring to, what you described here as, working with the antidotes to remorse, or if there is another translation or another word that they might be referring to.
Yeah, this is a good point. I would say that there is a remorse which is a wholesome quality. Maybe this is what we call, the Pali word used here is vipatisara rather than kukucha. This is when one has actually done something wrong and then one feels remorse for it. And then one tries to rectify the situation, sometimes by making an apology if it's a person that one's hurt, or by changing one's way of doing things if it's a habit of one's own that's creating harm. So definitely there is a kind of wholesome remorse. But that is something different from this kukucha, which is the disturbing the commentaries call this a scratching of the mind. It's a quality that scratches the mind and disturbs the mind, prevents it from settling down and becoming peaceful. Yeah. When there's a true remorse or a feeling of repentance, and then one takes the appropriate measure, like an apology, it leads to an inner joy and even a settling down of the mind, because now one is free from that burden of having done something wrong, or having offended or hurt somebody. Yes, Lloyd?
Is the doubt removed by a student the kind of good doubt encouraged by the Buddha?
So we start from the beginning. I think maybe you're too close to the microphone.
Is the doubt removed by a student is the kind of good doubt encouraged by the Buddha? Mm-hmm. And the doubt removed when one enters jhana is the skeptical doubt.
Yeah.
Or does a stranger remove both?
Yeah. This is a good question, and one that okay, first, the doubt that's removed by the stream enterer. This would be doubt about the Buddha as an enlightened teacher. So since the stream enterer has seen the truth of the Dhamma, he has no doubt that the Buddha is an enlightened one. The stream enterer has removed doubt about the Dhamma. Since he's seen the Dhamma for himself, and the stream enterer has removed doubt about the Sangha. This is the Aryan Sangha, the noble community of noble ones, because the stream enterer is actually now part of the Aryan Sangha. So he knows that there are people who have realized the truth and who are on the way to the overcoming of greed, hatred, and ignorance. So that is the doubt that the stream enterer has removed. One who's practicing for the attainment of jhana can still have these doubts, and those doubts, if they're arising in the mind, will become an obstacle for the attainment of jhana. And so, in order to attain the jhanas, if one is a Buddhist practitioner, one has to suspend one's doubts about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in order to practice diligently with the aim of attaining jhana. When the person attains the jhanas, that attainment will not remove the doubts about the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. The person could still have some doubt about that. And those doubts will still come up from time to time, or because the practitioner has developed skills in samadhi, he knows how to put those doubts aside and to practice in order to enter the jhanas. And also those who are non-Buddhist practitioners can also attain the jhanas. So attainment of the jhana is not dependent upon becoming a Buddhist practitioner. Okay, there's a question whether one who's achieved the stream entry could still have doubts in the sense of questions about different aspects of the teaching. I think that is certainly possible. The stream enterer could still have questions about maybe certain aspects of the teaching that he's not realized for himself. But these are not doubts about the Buddha as an enlightened one, about the Dhamma as the truth and the way to realization. And so it's a different kind of doubt in a different sense. More like uncertainties or questions about different aspects of the teaching. Does that answer the question? Okay.
It occurs to me that your question about the careful and careless issue, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me that careless is kind of automatic, just allowing it to happen, whereas the careful means volitional. With each of these, it's when I choose to do whatever,
right, yeah.
rather than kind of floating around in the stream. Does that do it in terms of the difference between the careless and the careful? Or is there more involved?
I would say that that's definitely an aspect of the difference. What's called careless attention is the attention to which we're habituated. And I deliberately use the word we. It's the kind of attention that occurs automatically, spontaneously. We say it's an unreflective mode of attention. Whereas what's called here careful attention or thorough attention, this is an attention that one has to develop through some volitional effort and through continued reflection.
May I ask,
Oh, you
may I ask a follow-up question to Bowman's question?
Okay.
Is doubt as one of the five hindrances related more to morality?
Related to
More to morality, doubt about morality, because it seems to me from the remedies, it's all about establishing, knowing what is.
actually that's a very good point. Yeah, the question or point was whether the doubt that's the obstacle to the attainment of the jhana is doubt about morality or about ethical qualities. The way the antidote is phrased, one gets the impression that this is doubt not only about morality in the sense of outward action, but it's doubt about the qualities of particular states of mind. What states of mind are wholesome, what are unwholesome. So uncertainty, like a person who's initially practicing might not understand that, say, sensual desire is unwholesome, thinking that if one just indulges one's desire, that brings pleasure and enjoyment, so what could be bad about it? When one gets angry or has resentment, one should just express one's anger and resentment, do something vengeful towards the other person. So one could have doubts in that sense. So I think that, we say that is the kind of doubt which is an obstacle to jhana, and that is overcome by the attainment of jhana. Okay.
Because I would think that morality is the foundation for jhana.
Oh, definitely.
More related.
Yeah.
Could you get rid of things like ill will during the meditation?
This explains what is meant by getting rid of ill will.
Like your anger, if you have some thoughts of anger and you get rid of during the meditation.
Definitely one can get rid of the anger or ill will during the meditation. Usually when one sits down to meditation, at the time one is sitting down in the beginning, one doesn't have the anger or ill will. Usually it comes during the meditation. Why does it come? Because it'll come into the mind, bubbling into the mind, some memories of something that's happened, usually something recently. And then the mind starts dwelling on those thoughts. And then this is the ill will is coming into the mind during the meditation. So when it comes, then one has to apply an appropriate remedy. It can be just bringing the mind back again and again to the primary meditation object and not letting the mind be pulled away by those thoughts of anger and ill will. And when one does this, one finds that thoughts of anger and ill will start fighting back. They want to remain in the mind. But if one just doesn't fight against them, but just lets them come up, bubble, and vanish, and continually brings the mind back to one's main object, maybe after a few minutes, the thoughts of anger and ill will just vanish on their own.
I'm just wondering, could you analyze this during the meditation now?
Can you analyze?
Yeah.
One can. There are different approaches. I don't want to go into that now because that is what that is what will be dealt with in another sutta that we'll be coming to as we go through this chapter. So I will the sixth hindrance. Phlegm is a hindrance to the voice. I will be dealing with that in the next class. your question just reminds me of a point that I should make, that what it calls here the primary antidotes are not the only antidotes, but there are different methods, different skillful means that can be used for dealing with these 5 hindrances, either individually or collectively. So we will come to that in the next class. Any further questions?
Funny. My question about energy, arousing energy. How does one arouse energy? I mean, is it different mental factors from the concentration on the subject?
Yeah. Yeah, there are different methods of arousing energy. Initially, sometimes it's just an effort to stir up the mind. A little bit like when you're in a sitting posture and you want to get up, you have to make some effort to arouse the body. And so there is that effort of arousing the mind. Sometimes there are thoughts that cause energy to be stirred up, to be aroused. For example, even reflecting on death, that I might die at any time. I don't even know whether I will live through this day. And so just reflecting like this will give a certain sense of excitement or a kind of boost of arousing energy to the mind. If any of these reflective methods don't work, then a method that's recommended is to leave the sitting meditation and to do walking meditation. Because when one is doing walking meditation, then one has to use the body in an active way. And when one is using the body actively, then the mind also has to function more actively.
If you do that, doesn't you cause the mind to deviate from the object concentration? Do we get drowsy for trying to focus on an object for a long time? And in order to rouse the mind, we actually have to rouse energy.
Yeah.
We're removing the mind from the object concentration. Doesn't that contradict to the purpose of arousing energy?
No. Because when one is doing the walking meditation, even though one might be putting the mind, putting aside observation of the breath, because it's very difficult to observe the breath when one is doing walking meditation. But if one is just walking back and forth, say, being mindful of each step, right step, left step, right step, left step, for a period, say 10, 15 minutes, then one comes back to the sitting meditation and turns the mind back to the breath, then one has stirred up the energy, and so now one has the energy to keep the mind more focused on the breath. Of course, what sometimes happens when one is doing the walking meditation, the mind is able to follow the walking. Then one comes back to the sitting meditation and again puts the mind back on the breath, and then 5 or 10 minutes there's a lot of energy, but then that dullness comes slipping back into the mind, and then the drowsiness comes, and then one is nodding again. That happens. But sometimes doing the walking is enough to arouse the energy, and then thereafter the energy can remain consistent. It's a little bit like stopping in a gas station to refill the tank of the car, so that the car has more gas in order to continue driving. You stop for 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the gas station. You can say, I'm not making any progress on my journey, but because you're filling the tank with gas, that enables you to continue the rest of the journey.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
About the careful attention to peace of mind. What is the peace of mind in Pali? What is the Pali word for this?
I know the word for peace is upasama. Is it chaitaso? I think it's chaitaso upasama.
Does it also mean harmony?
It doesn't mean harmony, no.
So this really just means
settling down, stilling, yeah. Any further questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, before we leave, I want to make one announcement. Like, some months ago, a number of us, people, this is connected with the Bodhi Monastery, a few people connected with this monastery, we formed an organization. You see, one thing that struck me about Buddhism in the West, especially the United States, is that it's very much focused almost inwardly on practicing meditation, studying Buddhist texts. But the way Buddhism is lived in Asia, it's very actively involved with the society, with the community. And so it struck me that there's a need for Buddhism in America to also develop a more active social dimension, especially concerned with the well-being of people in the poorer parts of the world. And so a number of us came together and we had discussions about this issue, and we decided to form an organization of Buddhists and Friends of Buddhism in the U.S. dedicated to providing aid and assistance to people in the poor parts of the world, people afflicted with poverty, society, social oppression. And seeking a particular focal point, we decided to take global hunger as our point of focus, since there are close to now 900 million people in the world afflicted with hunger. 900 million people don't know where the next meal are coming from. And many of these people, more than 50%, are children. So, according to statistics from the United Nations, every 5 seconds a child dies of malnutrition or hunger. And as we formed an organization, we call it Buddhist Global Relief. We're initially focusing on providing relief for people suffering from hunger and food insecurity in Buddhist countries in Asia. Later, we hope that we could extend more broadly to any country in which there is widespread hunger and malnutrition. But at present, we have a small group of people, but we need more help. And so if there are people who are, especially people who might have some background in either relief work, fundraising, charity work, who would like to join our organization and help with our efforts, I have a brochure with me which gives more information about the organization. And if you would definitely like to enroll, then please speak to Marcy. Will you volunteer to take names and contact addresses? You could raise your hand. Marcy is our secretary, so she will take your name and address. But even if you don't have the background in fundraising, relief work, but you would like to help in some way, then please, you could speak to Marcy. And if you just simply want to find out more about the organization, perhaps not with the aim of working with the organization, but in contributing to the organization, please take the brochure. I will put them up here. I have just a limited number of brochures, but if you don't get one, if you want to find out about the organization, you can go to the website. We all have the beginnings of a website. The website address is Buddhist Global Relief, all as one word, Buddhist Global Relief .org. It's proceeded www.buddhistglobalrelief.org. Okay, I will go now to take lunch. And also, I think the meal is served to the general public, so if you'd like to have lunch in the dining hall, you can. Then we will come back here meet again at 12 noon. And then if anybody has further questions, points for discussion, then we can discuss further. Okay, we end then with the sharing of the merits. I will recite in the Pali. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahitika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahitika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu desanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahitika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu mam param. Ekavatajam hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ekavatajam hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe bhudanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ekavatajam hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avicihetato ekantare satakaya upapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbut.